Today, I want to kick things off by just sharing the story of how the Fair Play Alliance came to be, and then transitioning into inviting a few of my guests up here to help me talk about the why, what, and how all around player behavior and some of the things that the Fair Play Alliance is looking at and looking into, just around content moderation and online safety topics. So the origin story goes way, way back to 2017. So Kimberly Vole, who is up here in the front row with us today from Riot Games, and Ben Lewis Evans, right up here from Epic Games, were on a phone call, and they were just talking about player behavior topics and kind of like their vision for the future of the game industry. And they just realized, like, we have a lot of things in common here. We're working in a lot of the same areas. We're talking about a lot of the same topics. We have a lot of the same vision. That's pretty cool. And then Kim had another call with Carlos and Chris from Two Hat. Same thing kind of happened. They're like, hey, we're talking about a lot of the same topics. We have a lot of the same visions. You know, we're talking about like collaborating around like education in high schools, some really cool stuff. And so Kim like kind of took a step back and thought about it. And she's like, you know, like, I'm having a lot of these sorts of conversations with my peers all across the industry. Like, maybe there's something more here. Maybe there's something we can build upon. So she set up the first call between herself, Ben, and Carlos to just talk about it and see what happened. And again, they aligned on a lot of topics and thought this was really cool. And one of the decision points at a meeting was, well, let's just put a calendar invite on the calendars of everyone we know who's working in this space at the time. And then this is kind of what that calendar invite looked like. Player behavior kickoff meeting. And we're a very international group, so the correct spelling of behavior is a raging debate even to this day. But there were 16 of us who made it to that call that day. I was one of those people. There's a bunch of other awesome people on that call, but we spoke for an hour, rapid fire, about all the cool topics that we were working on. And it became apparent that there were some huge common things around what we were doing for disruptive player behaviors, how we were fostering healthy and engaging player dynamics in online communities, addressing hate and harassment, building stakeholder alignment and buy-in at our respective companies, and a clear desire for many of us to share more about what we were doing to the rest of the industry. And coming out of that meeting, more so than anything else, there was an overwhelming desire from everyone on that call to do more together and to change the industry and to make gaming a more awesome experience for all of our players. So from there, we took the next steps of planning an on-site meeting of the minds, bringing back all those companies, as well as inviting some additional ones that we found out through talking with each other. And that first on-site meeting was hosted at Riot Games Christmas, right before Christmas of 2017. And that's where we planned our first GDC Summit last year. We came up with the name, the Fair Play Alliance, and everything just sort of took off from there. So like last year, we had 30 member organizations in the Fair Play Alliance, and this year we have over 100 member companies. And these member companies span the entire industry. It's game developers, it's gaming platforms, it's tool and technology providers. And because we realize that this is a issue that we have to tackle from the ground up, from every aspect, to kind of come together and just ground level across the entire industry talk about these things. So without further ado, I want to introduce my guests who are joining me today to share some of their combined visions of gaming platforms and technology, and two amazing friends of the Fair Play Alliance. We've got Chris Preed, CEO and founder of Two Hat.
Hi. Thanks.
And we've got Dave McCarthy, Corporate Vice President of Gaming at Xbox.
Thank you.
So I was hoping we could kind of kick it off and just like go off that question. So what is like why you're here? Why are you here participating in the Fair Play Alliance today?
You want to go ahead, Chris?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we wanted to have multiple perspectives. So not just one perspective, but the perspective that I'm supposed to bring and hoping to bring is the tool makers, the AI piece, how can we help from the industry perspective.
Yeah, and obviously being on Xbox and overseeing all of our operations there and all the good teams back in Redmond, I'm coming from more of a platform perspective today and trying to give some insight on how we view the area of online safety, which is a big part of my purview at Microsoft, and try and contribute to the conversation here. We think that these sort of forums where we're bringing together multiple perspectives from the industry and working together are really critical for us to get stuff done in this space.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And Blizzard's happy that we all kind of came to this shared conclusion that there's not really a reason to compete in this area. Anything that we each do from any of our respected areas across the industry helps everyone. Like, we want to just make sure that everyone has fun in our games. So we'll kick it off to the first question. So what does a healthy online community look like? What are we driving towards? What is that vision that we have?
Well, I mean, one of the other pieces I have the pleasure of working on at Xbox is a movement we've had afoot for the past few years called Gaming for Everyone. And it's our move to be really intentional throughout the Xbox organization on all the decisions we make in terms of including everyone, making product features for everyone, and building communities really for everyone. We want Xbox to be a place where everyone has fun. And I think healthy communities in that wrapper, they look like ones where diverse perspectives are respected and gamers are respected no matter what their angle is coming into that community. I think one of the really unique aspects of gaming is it has a really powerful ability to be a great unifier in a time when I think we sorely need it in society. I grew up playing competitive sports, and there was a community around that, and I thought that was great on unifying because, at the end of the day, you shake hands and good game and it's all done. Gaming's a step beyond that. The ability to connect remotely with people from all sorts of backgrounds you would never otherwise be able to connect with is such a powerful thing that we have, and making sure that we're fostering healthy communities to ensure that unifying connection, that's really important for us moving ahead.
Yeah. I'm going to go a little bit personal on there. So I got 4 kids, younger kids, and I've got this room downstairs. I got a projector, a big screen TV, you throw the console on there, and I got tables in the back with a bunch of laptops to do multiplayer games. What good looks like is everyone's laughing, they're having a good time, we're getting closer together, we're building community. What bad looks like is someone's throwing a train at me, or they're yelling, they're screaming, they're crying. Yeah, we put the trains out for the 3-year-old or whatever.
Yeah.
So also bad would look like is we're playing like Mario, and my 4-year-old goes and picks me up and throws me off a cliff, and then I have to start the whole level all over again. Like it's just too far. But it's perfectly fine if we're playing Mario Kart, and he's like smashing me up against the wall and like wiping me out because I can recover from that kind of element. But what's most important, what good really looks like, is 2 of my kids are girls. And I think it's critically important that as they get older, they're going to be allowed to play, because I'm teaching them to play games. And I don't think it's fair that half the population can't turn on audio. That's just not right. I don't think we have to put up with that. And so I'm looking forward to this internet where they can play. And just like you're saying, it's for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And from like the game development side as well, like our idea of a healthy community is one that's free of hate and harassment, so that players can just really enjoy and consume like the epic experience that our game designers create for them, because it is a craft, and we take that experience very importantly in our design process, and so we want to safeguard that experience. So next question, how has the gaming industry changed in the last few years?
Oh, it hasn't changed at all. Next question. Yeah.
Not a loaded question.
Yeah. I mean, from a safety perspective, it's really interesting because the number of ways that people can now socially interact in gaming environments has really exploded in recent years. And I think that's been great from the perspective of creating those unifying connections. It also just provides a bunch of challenges in terms of being able to cover that much surface area and make sure that we're aware of what's going on socially in all those areas. I think the other thing that's great is you have a generation of multiple generations now that have grown up with gaming as their primary form of entertainment, and in a lot of cases their primary sort of social communication channel as well. And those gamers are very fluid in terms of where they show up. They don't just dedicate themselves to Xbox or PlayStation or the PC space or the mobile space. They move fluidly between all of them, and that in itself creates some interesting dynamics when it occurs when it comes to safety overall. And so, rightly so, I think a lot of parents and regulators and press customers in general are asking, what we're doing to stay on top of that. And that's kind of the spirit of getting together today, because it is accelerating that pace of change really quickly, which is a wonderful thing in terms of connecting people, but nonetheless challenging for us.
Yeah. So go back 7 years ago, I went to my first game conference, and I started this unofficial tally of the most outrageous things people would say to me. And so providing chat filters and those sorts of things, people would say, oh, that's good for kids sites. That's where we were like 7 years ago, is like this idea of dealing with the problem was isolated to children's-based products. Then we went through the whole Gamergate and all that crap that we all had to go through. That started changing a lot of stuff, right? And then 4 years ago, I'd go to conferences and people would say, oh, that's really interesting. You need to talk to these 2 sites. And I won't name them because they're actually part of the Fair Play Alliance and done great work, and they've changed their whole sites around, which is amazing. And then we started having people like Riot Games to give an amazing talk, I think one of the first talks at GDC, to talk about this issue and how it's impacting. People are more likely to quit if they experience this content. And that's followed on by several other talks. And then about 2 years ago, the tone shifted again. And people said, you got to talk to me. So it started off as, that's for children's sites, that's for those people over there, to you've got to talk to me. And now here we are all together, and now it's like, let's do it together. And so we've seen this huge movement towards caring about the issue and taking it seriously and doing something about it, which has been phenomenal.
Yeah, and building off that point too, like there is a real choice there. Like choosing to do nothing is a design choice, and it creates an ecosystem that you may not necessarily want. It is choosing to make something in a very real way. And there's plenty of examples out there of communities that are just completely unmoderated, and we've seen what happens to those. And I think a lot of us don't want that sort of community within our games and our entertainment experiences.
Yeah, and even so, it used to be like 7 years ago, I actually had people say to me, but those are the users that I want. So speaking about the disruptive behavior and the toxicities, like they actually wanted to build their game around those kinds of people. Well, now those same kind of groups are actively involved in like trying to change that and be so that people don't say that nonsense anymore, which is incredible. I think we've really had a shift in the industry.
Awesome. So here's a good question for you guys. Why should gaming executives and senior leadership care about the player behavior discipline?
Just as a point of order, are you able to rate your own question when you...
There's a survey at the end.
Got it, okay. All right, okay. I mean, the case for this one seems pretty obvious to me. In a world of a lot of choices for gamers now, which is awesome, engagement is really the sort of order of the day. You can't monetize, you can't sort of, create any sort of relationship with a gamer if you don't have regular engagement from them. And the fact of the matter is, people may show up once or twice to check something out, but they're not going to stay if they don't feel welcome. And we measure this actually behind the scenes a lot on Xbox in terms of the sort of conditions by which people feel they can regularly come back to environments. So to Chris's point earlier about certain people being engaged and staying, their presence could potentially cause a lot of other people not to be engaged.
That's right.
And not to be in those environments overall. And when you think about expanding markets, expanding platforms, expanding genres, I firmly believe that inability to create welcoming communities and environments will be the thing that will hold engagement back in a lot of communities in the gaming space.
Yeah, there's an old saying that says, I love your game, I hate the community. But what we want is we want people to say, you know what, I should have quit this game years ago, but because of the community that's there, I just keep staying. Like that, I think there's too many products that could have become evergreens that died young. And so when we think about it, there's another reason why we should really care about it. And you think about it, is what we're really doing is we're making a party. We're making a fun place. We're making a place for people to hang out. It's like, let's say we build a nightclub. And we build this amazing nightclub, and it's such a great place to hang out, but we put a balcony on there, and we're like, you know what, let's not bother with a railing, because we don't need a railing on our balcony. It's just going to be more fun if people can hang off the end a little bit and push each other. That'd be like more fun. But then when people start falling off and getting hurt, the government's got this idea of this duty of care. Like you've got a responsibility. If you create the party, you've got a responsibility to take care of it. And if people are getting hurt at your place, it's bad for you in two ways. One is they're going to sue you. And as the internet goes from the first early adopters going on to games and being like, I guess that's just the way it is, to like the whole world's now playing games, the rest of the world's not going to get it. And they're going to be like, this is not right. I'm not going to put up with this. And they're going to start having things. The government's also going to say there's a duty of care, and they're going to start making legislation. They're going to start doing things. They're going to put fines out there, which is terrifying. We need to take care of it before they do, because if we watched the Senate last year, I don't want, we want to make sure that they're highly informed correctly about what's technically possible and how it works, right? And the other thing is that if people are falling off your balcony in your game, or people are having post-traumatic stress disorder, people are getting distraught, people are going to commit suicide, those kinds of elements, you don't want to have that brand damage of like, this is the game where people go get hurt. This is the game where it's not fun. This is the game where it's a terrible experience. No, I don't know any developers that wake up in the morning and they go like, I'm going to make a crappy game where people hate it. Like that's not why they made the game, right? So if we want to make great games, we got to care about our users and their full experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I know in terms of like the stickiness of really awesome communities, that really resonates with us at Blizzard Entertainment. I know a lot of other game developers as well, because the main driver is we want people to have fun in our games. And abuse and harassment are barriers to that. Being bullied or harassed online is not something that really anyone enjoys. An analogy I like to use is think about like if you were a new player for golf. You go out there, you take your first swing, it doesn't go that great, you shank it off into the woods, and the group behind you starts, slinging hate speech at you, being abusive or bullying you. That's not a fun experience. Like you are much more likely to never go and try golf again because your initial experience was just horrible. And so that is a barrier to entry for an entertainment experience that we don't want to have for our games.
I feel like I'm empty on the analogy department. You got a
Do you want to revisit? Do you want to throw an analogy
nightclub
out
that
there?
stresses me out, and it sounds like every game of golf I play actually. Yeah, ball goes into.
Who do you
the
play
woods.
with?
Yeah.
Where do you go golfing?
The other thing, Chris, you touched on that I want to come back to is the notion of responsibility as an industry. Really, I think with being a large-scale, mass-market form of entertainment. For us as game makers and publishers and platform holders and companies in this space, there's a responsibility for us to do the right thing here for our players overall. I love how proactive we were in earlier years with things like the ESRB on the content rating side. And recently with IARC, expanding that to the digital space. This is a similar area where we want to definitely get ahead of things as an industry and understand this is a real obligation and responsibility. I know I carry it every day when we come into the office, and something we take really, really seriously.
Yeah. And like speaking of industry, like I think the gaming industry is unique in a lot of ways. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask was just from your perspective, how is the gaming industry and gaming as a form of entertainment different than other mediums, things like social media?
Yeah, they're super, super chatty, like incredibly chatty, because we work with both the social and the games. There's some games do more chat than Twitter. Like that's how like chatty there. It's incredible. But there's a second thing though about games is that there's this expectation of like, look, that's just the way it is. There's all this disruptive behavior, there's all this hate, there's whatever, and that's just the cost of being online. And I'd like to say, and I'd like all of us to say, no, it's not. There's nothing that says that it's okay to hate. It's nothing that says it's okay to be mean. There's nothing that's okay to encourage someone to commit suicide. That is just not okay. It's not the cost of admission. It's not the cost of having my microphone and my headset on, just I have to hear all this stuff all the time. No, that's not good and it's not expected. And so there's this weird dichotomy where gaming can potentially be quite a bit worse than some of the other social environments, and for some reason we came to accept it, and I don't think we need to.
Well, and I think you're touching on too the notion of, there is competitive banter.
Yes, for sure.
Which is all fine and good. But there's a line that can get crossed when you start disrespecting other gamers in those environments. And it's one of those things where I think we know it when we hear it, because it strikes an emotional chord with us. But it's really nuanced. It's time sensitive. You're in the heat of the moment. Even when you're in a cooperative situation. I do have an analogy, actually, Chris.
Give it.
I recently did one of those escape rooms with my kids, they were really mean to me. I'm not good in an escape room, I found. Were it not for them, I might still be there. But they said some things in the moment that were a little hurtful. But it was sort of in the sort of competitive, fun notion of it. And I think we've got to find those techniques, those technologies that allow us to understand that context and that nuance of what's going on in a gaming environment, because it is really heat of the moment. It can be cooperative, it can be competitive. It's a really unique and special medium in that regard, but a really challenging one as well.
But you're onto something too. Like, you probably had a teachable moment afterwards, right? I don't know. Sometimes we embrace it, sometimes we don't with our kids. But you can say, you know what? When you said that, this is how I felt. And in virtual worlds, we have the opportunity as well that when something happens, you could actually have that instructional moment where this is how the other person may have felt, or like maybe it's after a little bit where they had some chance to reflect. Because people will screw up. People will make mistakes. They will be disruptive. But I wonder how we can start helping them to learn from it as a teachable moment.
It's a great point.
Yeah, Dave, I actually really like your example of like the escape room, because in gaming, like there's a lot of competitive experiences, but there's also a lot of like collaboratively competitive experiences. So like MOBAs or games like Overwatch, where you're competing against another team, but you have other people on your team. And what we see is that abuse and harassment occurs more within those teams of people, blaming each other or being abusive or harassing to each other, more so than it does from team to team. And so I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. It's a big difference between the mediums. So what does good behavior talk look like? We've been talking a lot about it, but like, what does that actually look like? What does that kind of feel like when you're experiencing it?
You want to take it?
I completely forgot what I was going to say here.
Well, you're supposed to come up with something spur of the moment, Chris. Well, let me start. We'll see if we can.
Yeah, this
I'm just going to play with this controller a little bit.
Some caffeine up here for this man, please. Yep. Managing a community the size of Xbox Live is really interesting in terms of, good takes on a bunch of different shapes depending on, the game, the audience, and trying to be the fun police of all that from a moderation perspective is literally a fool's errand. You will be entirely unsuccessful with that overall. I think good behavior is creating, tools and ways for users to be able to speak up. So what we've tried to do in Xbox is, hey, wherever you're interacting socially, you have a way to flag something that feels concerning, so that if you do see something, you can say something right in the moment there, because I think that's really important for people to be able to share that context. And, and then for us to be able to respond to that in a timely manner is important as well. I think where really good behavior is going is communities are more self-regulating on a lot of those pieces overall, right? So they are establishing the norms of communication in their channels. One of the things I love is kind of going in and looking at Xbox clubs and seeing all the different groups and interests that surface there. And it's amazing to watch the ability of communities who know the kind of nuances of what's going on in those communities to be able to self-regulate in a way that is really, really positive for people in those.
Yeah, and I think as we talk about these sort of things, it's really important to understand as well that like in gaming, in the space, like the vast overwhelming majority of players are actually like really nice people. They're not jerks. They're not like the folks that are like having these like abusive or harassing behaviors, but the effect of those behaviors can be magnified like really severely. So like take an example of like a 5v5 MOBA, and there's one person on a team that's being abusive or harassing. That person is ruining the experience of at least 4 other players, if not the entire 9 other people in that match. And so like, even if it's 1 in 10 players, as a player, you may feel like, oh man, every match I play has this bad experience because of a very small minority of players.
We also think about good is when we talk about good, we're not talking about goody goodies. We're not talking about whitewashing the whole thing. It's still going to be competitive. People are still going to push each other, We just don't want them to push them over or push them off a cliff, right? So that, I mean, that's kind of a key element to the whole thing. And I think what makes it good is at the end of the day, you remember the other person's humanity. And so we go back to the real world and you got competitive sports again. There's that part at the end of the game, like in a soccer match, where they've been fighting hard, they've been competing really, really hard, and they're really angry at the other person. And then they get up the middle and they start walking across and they start shaking each other's hands and they say, good game, good game, good game, but they're touching skin to skin. And it's in that moment that we connect with them and remember this is a human. They're not just a bunch of bits and bytes on the computer screen. They're not just an avatar. They're not just a bot. They're not just some piece of garbage that you can kick. But they're actually another human being. And we get back to that empathy and we remember them for who they are. And that's when it starts becoming really, really good, is that it's the real, and that's why we added the multiplayers. We wanted that realness of the real human and not just a bot that we're fighting against.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
There's a notion there too of allyship, I think, which is really important to think about, right? Like you may not be the person who's directly receiving some sort of harassment feeling or negative feeling towards you, but you could be observing it, right? You could be in a group chat, you could be in a multiplayer match. And I think it's just as important for us to sort of promote that notion of being allies for others in community spaces. I think that's a really positive behavior. I see that, I know we have a program on Xbox called the Ambassadors. And they're about 100,000-ish super fans that go out and do a bunch of stuff across our communities overall. And one of the really interesting things lately that we've found is we've explicitly asked them to go out and be allies for other gamers, to go out and find people who are maybe trying to do multiplayer for the first time, or trying to complete certain games, or trying to join certain clubs. And it's been a really powerful thing to see us promote the notion of becoming an ally for other gamers in the ecosystem, because that has this really positive snowball effect that starts to happen.
Absolutely. So last year there was a talk about, I'm going to tie back into that. There was a talk about, well, what do you do with all your negative players? Couldn't you just throw them all in one room server together and they can have Prisoner Island? And the advice last year was probably not, because then people are going to learn those behaviors and they'll reinforce that with it. But since then, there's been some new discussion, which is, well, couldn't you figure out who your top players are, like your ally players, the ones that could be these leaders, if you introduce them to your new players? So you match make some of the people that are always positive with your new players, you're going to create a culture. So your first user experience is going to be like, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to help your colleague. You're supposed to help them learn how to do it. You're supposed to be a good ally. You're supposed to do all that elements. And you give these people a special role and an honor for doing it, so that they can become.
Love that.
So I think they go the other way than Prisoner Island. Actually do that matchmaking, but do it on the positive and connect your new users with good users.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of something where it was a feature designed with these sorts of things in mind. How do we enable that empathy? How do we enable the sorts of behaviors we want to cultivate in our communities? And I think, like, from a game development side, we can do a lot more from that perspective in terms of making sure we're introducing features that are specifically tailored around, like, the player experience. And Chris, I don't know if this was on purpose, but you were actually with the Prisoner Island thing previewing one of our topics we have towards the end of the day, where we talk a lot about, like, the common misconceptions, and that whole, like, Prisoner Island is actually one of those topics.
Awesome.
So thanks for that.
Did you mean to do that?
I might have.
Okay, good. I think you should be very transparent with people. That's part of it. Yeah.
So our next question are, what are some of the key challenges and then some of the innovative answers regarding player behavior on your respective perspectives?
Yeah, so I was kind of touching on that a little bit, but it does come down to that first user experience. That first user experience when you come into the game means so much, because that's going to set the tone of what's happening. So an analogy, again, going back to my analogies, here at GDC, right, this is the game culture. And yet look how friendly we are at this game culture. Like, you don't see people standing up in the middle of the hallway out there screaming and yelling and telling people they're a bunch of whatevers. That doesn't happen, right? Because there's an expectation. There's a security guard there. And when you pass that security guard, you understand, like, oh, something's happening. Likewise, in our games, we might have automated moderation. We might have human moderators. When in GDC a few years ago, there was this huge banner, because there were some issues that happened some years ago. There's a huge banner that says, this is our code of conduct that happens. We walk into our games, and there's a code of conduct. And people come to that code, they conform to, like, the social expectations. The first thing they're asking is, how do I behave in this kind of group? If they see other people being idiots, they're going to behave similar. If they see people being positive and encouraging, they'll behave similar. Even to the point where at GDC, there was that whole issue around how can we support our transgender community? And so GDC set a cultural expectation that people are okay. Don't make fun of people, and encourage them and support them and cheer them on in their transitions of life. And so that was a culture-setting move that came from the conference. And we also have the opportunity to establish the culture of our games when people first walk in, based on our messaging and how we interact and what we expect from people.
Yeah. It's one of the things that weighs on me while I get excited about the opportunity of 2 billion gamers around the globe and engaging in all the good stuff that we do. The scale of that challenge in terms of how do we moderate healthy communities at that scale, it's real. And when you think about the different sort of endpoints and different type of social interactions, whether it be audio, whether it be video, whether it be text, things will break, right? If we as platform holders and developers and game makers don't make changes to the way we tackle that scale problem, it is real. And there are solutions that we can employ, like AI and ML models, and yet it's still going to require some blend with human intervention as well. And I would say, like, the thing we've really got to watch out for, and we talk a lot about this at Microsoft in general, is how do we avoid any bias in those tools and those models overall? Because what we do has to be very nuanced and directed, say, to different geographies or subpopulations, and constantly being on the lookout for biases and sort of that unintentional exclusion or directing things sort of one way, I think is a real thing we have to get ahead of and understand as an industry that we have the capability to do it. We've just got to be aware that it's there and plan for it ahead of time.
Yeah, and I think from like the game developer side as well, like there's a lot to be said about education and enforcement and better tools for those areas. But often for specific behaviors, the best solution is just thinking about these things in the design phase and in the engineering phase. A couple of examples, if you don't want players fighting over loot and getting into conflicts around that, make loot instanced. Make it so that you can't fight over loot. Same thing if you don't want griefing via team killing or abuse or harassment via team killing, turn off team damage. Like there's very easy ways that you can analyze the experience that you want to deliver and take these player to behavior topics into account and design around those so that the behaviors can't even manifest in the first place. And then you don't have to worry about enforcement and education.
I'm glad you shared that example, Jared, actually, because that's a really, I think, healthy practice we have with some of the teams in Xbox, like with our Xbox Live team. When we're contemplating any new feature to roll out to the platform broadly, we do a full-on assessment of, okay, well, how would we deal with reporting on this feature overall? And what are the automated solutions we might be able to employ? And if we employ those automated solutions, let's say it's something like image scanning, is it going to happen in a timely manner so that we're not creating too much friction for users? Because again, if you're creating too much friction, people are going to start to work around features, and they're not going to use the controls that are there to kind of keep them safe in the first place. Can we do it in a cost-effective manner? Very important for all of us as game makers from a business perspective. And when we look at different groups in the organization, how do they perceive this feature and our ability to support safety around it? And it's interesting because you get different perspective. We have something internally through Gaming for Everyone called feedback crews. And I always love that anybody in the organization at a moment's notice can kind of put the call out for a feedback crew and get that diverse perspective on how a new feature may be perceived along those lines. Cool. It's a very healthy input process for us.
Well, we need to put more thought into it. Like, I'm deeply worried that a lot of games go this way. It's like they're working on it for several years. Again, the last few weeks, they're like, hey, I heard that adding chat will increase our engagement. Let's just throw it in there. And then they just, it's like, are you serious? That's like saying, oh, you know what, I heard that if having a huge sword that you can swing and it kills everyone in the room is really, really good. Let's just do that, but we'll not put in the controls of like, what's going to be the impact on the experience? Like, we put so much effort into balancing the game mechanics. We got to put the same amount of effort into balancing our social mechanics, because they are just as devastating than an unbalanced game mechanic.
Absolutely.
So Chris, when you use that example of just throwing chat in at the last minute, I saw an uncomfortable number of people nodding along, like, yeah, I've been there, like I've had that discussion. Revisiting one of your points too about just like thinking globally and making sure you're avoiding bias. So Blizzard, as we were looking through like how we wanted to use machine learning at our company, made a decision very early on to use internal and community-facing resources to help train those algorithms, because there were options we could look at externally that would have been faster, would have been less expensive in terms of manpower, but we were worried that the solution we developed using that data or training those algorithms wouldn't reflect either our community values or our company values, and so that was super important to us. So we made the decision to take the longer path and do it right and make sure that those values were reflected in our solutions. So speaking of community, how do we involve the community more in this process as we're developing these player behavior features and solutions?
Well, I mean, I gave the example earlier of the Xbox ambassadors, and the reason I shared that, I think, is it's just amazing when you share your value system with your user base and say, hey, this is something we care deeply about. You know, I know Phil Spencer, our head of Xbox, has talked to DICE and other forums about the value system we have on gaming for everyone, and it's a really easy conversation to share those values with the community base, and they will go off and running with it quickly. We've seen that with the ambassador program. The other thing I'd say we're learning is really important is transparency, right? I think. I'll use the example of like the what we called previously the policy and enforcement team on Xbox Live. There was kind of this notion of it's this nameless, faceless, the term in the past, the ban hammer would get used on people, sort of thing. And I think being transparent about everything that you can within reason, obviously, from hey, this is the good behavior that we expect. We put that in things like our terms of use, and we try and reinforce it in our educational materials that we have throughout our ecosystem overall. But also, too, I've found what's really interesting is when we start to share evidence back with people in investigations overall. So we've had countless cases, really, where I just got suspended. I got a communication suspension for 24 hours. What the heck happened? I don't remember doing anything. And then you share the text string, and you hear back, oh, yep,
Makes
my
sense
bad.
now. Yeah.
Yep. But I think, having the, and that doesn't always happen, obviously, but that sort of attitude of being transparent on, why we're doing what we're doing, I think is another key element of building community trust, which will pay off at some point later in terms of the relationship with your gamers.
I agree.
Thank you, Chris.
So one other way that we kind of engage with the community, or at least make sure that we are engaging with the community in the appropriate way, is we actually measure player trust through kind of a number of different qualitative and quantitative methods. For example, when abusive or harassing behavior happens, what is the likelihood that a player will report that? That's a really good indicator of, do they trust your system? Do they think it works? And similar to what Dave said, like, we've seen a lot of success in being more transparent, implementing feedback messages that both warn players who are kind of starting to accumulate some of these reports, as well as thanking players who've used the report system that has led to a penalization. We thank them and let them know, hey, your report mattered, we looked at it, we took it seriously, and we took action. And that's been really important, and has been a huge driver of those player trust metrics. So building on that a little bit more, how do we guide players in a more positive way?
Want to do that one? Or do you need more coffee?
I need more coffee.
Jeez. This guy's killing me up here.
No, you can't have a talk about this unless I troll you just a little bit.
Right, yeah. Thank you. That's sort of against the spirit of this whole thing. But, yeah.
This is an example of productive banter.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this does go back to that first user experience, right? So we have to, from the day one when they first come in, so if they see that terms of use, this is what's expected. And the other part is that they have to know that when you do that report system, something actually happens. Like someone's going to actually care about it and do something about that. But also, like when people are being positive, like sometimes we talk so much about negative behavior. What would happen if we just focused on positive behavior in a way, right? We sure would deal with negative behavior, but maybe if we just dive into the positive behavior and be like, well, how can we reward it? How can we promote it? How can we highlight it? How can you earn part of your rewards and your positioning inside the game for being a good citizen?
Yeah, you mentioned the promotion angle, and I think that's really important. Like what you decide to put in your main lobby screens or whatever surfaces you have to kind of highlight your value system to your gaming population is really important. So in the case of clubs, which I talked about earlier, making sure that we're doing a really diligent job understanding the clubs where there is a lot of really healthy engagement going on, giving those clubs the spotlight in our dash or our community channels is really important, because it does become sort of self-reinforcing when you shine the spotlight on those. And it's amazing, kind of people follow where the other people are, and if the other people are doing good things and we're putting the spotlight on it,
yeah,
it has
that could be
snowball
just
effect.
as simple as grabbing one of those live streaming platforms, taking one game that was absolutely awesome where people like doing great stuff, and then featuring those, like, look at this awesome game. And then if you feature it enough, people will be like, oh, I guess that's what that game's about. It is about being awesome.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah, and in addition to that too, like we've been seeing more and more games developing actual in-game features and progression systems and reward systems around positive interaction. So like Riot has done this with the honor system in League of Legends. Blizzard has done that with the endorsement system in Overwatch. And we've seen huge successes from those efforts. And it's something that we encourage all games to kind of look at and think of, like, how can we guide players toward this like more positive interaction and these sorts of behaviors that we want to cultivate. Well, let's build progression systems around that. Let's build reward systems around that and help build that up as just a part of your community and the culture of your game.
But the number one objection I get when I talk about a reward system or a trust-based system, people are going to game it. Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is, I hope they do, because maybe they'll like the experience they get, because all of a sudden they're being kind to people and they actually make friends and people play games with them and they're like, huh, this is, okay, I'll tell you a funny story. So we used to, before this, was helping build this game called Club Penguin, was my brother's game. And we had this thing where people would like, if you said something that was negative, it wouldn't show on the screen. And so we just filtered by just not showing it on the screen at all. It showed on their screen, just no one knew that didn't happen. Well, what we ended up doing is we observed that people were getting no feedback for being negative because they thought they said it and they didn't get anything. But then they said, do you want to play a game? And all these people jumped on them and said, yes, let's play a game. They're like, cool. And we actually watched over time their behaviors transform because they wanted attention, and they got attention on the things that we wanted. Now, age that up a little bit, but there's something there that we can actually give people attention through positive stuff.
Yeah, so to share another little story around this topic, so after we released the endorsement system in Overwatch, we did some player surveying just to ask them, like, how were they seeing it being used? Did they have any problems with it? Could we make it better? And overall, it was just overwhelmingly like positive, really good. Really the only kind of negative comment we saw from a couple of people was like they felt like people were being fake nice. And I feel like, well, isn't that so much better than them being jerks or abusing and harassing you? So like, if you design your system really well, where abuse of that system is them pretending to be nice, I feel like you've met most of the goal.
I laugh because as fellow Canadians, we get accused of being fake nice here all the time. Yeah, we really are that nice, actually.
You just don't mess with our hockey.
That's right. That's right.
All right, so the last question for the day. What do you guys see as like the future state, the next stage for player behavior, content moderation, and online safety space, just as a discipline and as an industry?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we're entering a phase where blending, and I think you might have even used this phrase with me the other day, Chris, AI and HI.
That's right.
Right, so the artificial intelligence, but also the human intelligence on this, and getting that blend right, I think those are going to be the success stories of the future, because our AI models are going to get very sophisticated, but they are going to require this degree of human judgment throughout, and human interaction and human touch, and that mix is going to be really interesting. I think we're going to see more, hopefully, on the measurement side of things. I'm this firm believer, no matter what area it is of our gaming business, that we really can't improve what we don't measure. And so figuring out ways to objectively and quantitatively find good behavior, measure the impact of good behavior in the ecosystem, and when we're talking about corrective actions for disruptive behavior, seeing which ones are most effective at correcting behavior. I think we're going to see more and more effort on the measurement side. And then the last thing I'd say is hopefully we see more collaboration like this. You know, I mean, Xbox is not an official FPA member, but I've got all these stickers now, and I consider myself.
You're definitely a friend of the Alliance.
Thank you. I consider myself a friend of the FPA and an advocate in this space, and obviously Chris and I have worked together a lot. But more like this, right? These are big opportunities and challenges for us to figure out. But the more sort of collaborations we can get going, because this is bigger than any of us, I hope we see more and more of that moving ahead.
Yeah, same thing. I like what you're saying about measuring. So measuring, we go on these listening trips where we go and talk to all these game studios and such on. And the big theme that we heard last December when we went down to here in San Francisco, because we're back again, is we need to have a baseline of like, what does healthy look like? We need a way of measuring how is my community doing in regards to its health, but then have an international standard so that we can say, how do we compare against my peers? So then we can know, as we add features, is it improving? And what we're going to see is that there's this idea of raising the bars. When one game company adds a new feature and it does really, really good, the other game companies are going to replicate, and that's what we talk about the non-competing. Like, this is like, we just need to get it good, right? And when you raise the bar, that's going to become the norm. And then the other company is going to do it, but they're going to do it even better. They'll raise the bar even more, and then they'll raise the bar even more. And then what we're going to end up happening is that's going to be the norm, and the standard is to have healthy and wonderful, fun, engaging, collaborative, and competitive games. It's going to be crazy awesome. So the first thing I think is that measuring and raising this bar element. The second one is we got to do something about this audio filtering. Like we've been working on the text for like years. We got that pretty darn good. A bunch of other people got it really, really good. But this audio filtering is almost nothing. Like, there's almost no solutions now for audio filtering, except for I've had some amazing meetings this week with amazing folk. And I think that together, if we put a bunch of people together, I'm pretty sure we can solve this problem in the short term even. So I think there's something happening with audio filtering that's going to happen this year. Which leads to my third one. The way we have to solve it is different because we're reaching the maximum capacity of what AI can do. So AI can maybe get 90, 95, maybe even 98% accuracy on one algorithm. So the way, if we take a leaf from the self-driving cars book, right? So self-driving cars, I'll come back to this, it'll make a lot of sense in a moment. What happens with self-driving cars is the stakes are so high you can't run someone over on the road. Right? So what they do is they mount multiple cameras on top of the car. And if you take the analogy, multiple AI systems, different perspectives. So that if you got some guy walking down the street wearing a sign that says, stop, right? It doesn't just troll the whole car motion system, right? You've got AIs trained for different things and different perspectives. So bring that back to what we're doing. The stakes are so high in what we want to do. We don't want to just interrupt people's audio signals. We don't want to change those kinds of elements. And so we should have stuff where we train stuff exactly that Blizzard perspective that gets your values and cores. And we should have something that comes from, like, you guys got wicked awesome text to, or voice to text, right. And then bring another system in that's able to take the intonation and the inflection and do transfer learning and blend them all together. And that's the only way I think really forward is together, which is why we have this, is each of us is working on a piece of the puzzle. And like that self-driving car, we take all of our different pieces, mount them as lenses, take our perspectives, and then we'll stop driving people over on the roads.
Are people really wearing stop sign
I told you,
shirts?
They will. Once the gamers get out there and find out they're self-driving cars, they will.
You gave me a great business idea. I'm going to start selling T-shirts with stop signs
It's going to go, I mean, it's going to work.
Seems wrong.
That wasn't where I wanted to go with the whole thing. But we know they're going to do that. Yeah, we know they're going to do that. There's people out there that do that. Okay, so that was fun.
So yeah, I think just to kind of sum everything up and sum up the day, like, there's some key takeaways here. You know, obviously number one is it takes a village. Like, this is something we're all in the industry together. We're all working towards these things, and all the progress that we make help everyone. And so this is something that's really important that we work collaboratively on. And it's an industry-wide call to action. Like, this is something that no matter where you are in the industry, you can have some influence and you can change this. Like obviously we'd love it if you joined the Fair Play Alliance and got more involved, but it doesn't even need to be that. Like you can just talk to your peers in the industry, ask them, like, what are you doing at your company? What are you thinking about? What are some of the processes that we can maybe borrow? And just figure out how you can foster these positive behaviors and reduce the disruptive ones. And then the last point is just player behavior and safety by design. So have these conversations with the design teams as they're looking at features and functionality and help them understand why they should prioritize some of these positive reinforcement systems, things like honor, things like endorsements, because they make a real measurable change in the ecosystem. And that's my soapbox. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you Chris and Dave for being so awesome and joining us up here on stage today to share your perspective around all these topics. Thank you everyone in the audience today for coming and showing that you feel like this is an important topic. That's really awesome. Thank you everyone in the future who's watching this on the Vault. You're awesome, really important. And then just thank you to all of our sponsors who help the Fair Play Alliance make things like the GDC Summit possible.